start my recording and I will go ahead and go through the notes. So there is a lecture video too. I think that was you, Cecilia. It is from last semester, so sorry the date is wrong. So it's starting with it's starting with everything that we did after the midterm. So that is starting with chapters. So as you'll remember, we referred to extreme variable. Okay, confused myself. I accidentally pushed play. I was so confused. Hi, Renisha. So we're doing everything that we have done after the midterm. So when we're looking into the text, we are starting with non-experimental research. So starting with chapter 14, non-experimental research, then going into descriptive statistics and inferential statistics, then coming back to chapter 15 to do the narrative inquiry. Now, this section right here, kind of in between chapters 14 and 15 is helpful for just an introduction to qualitative research and the different types. So that is there too. So chapter 15 and then 16 is a few more qualitative approaches, then mixed methods, and then data analysis, and then writing the research support report. So from chapters 14 to 21. So the first thing is that I go over in the lecture is talking about non-experimental research, and then also in the lecture slides. So non-experimental research. So we've already covered experimental research in the midterm. Non-experimental research is different because non-experimental research is for instances where you can't manipulate the independent variable. So that means that the independent variable, it could be something that's predetermined, such as like a student's grade level, like they can't change what grade they're in, so you can't really manipulate it and make a fifth grader an eighth grader for the study. So non-experimental research is for all of those instances where we cannot manipulate the independent variable. So that's the key point that you need to know about non-experimental research, is it does not involve manipulation. But instead, researchers are trying to understand the relationship between variables. So it could be one of the examples that they gave in the text is about, for non-experimental research, is income after college and gender. So you can't manipulate gender. So that would be non-experimental research. So instead of manipulating it with a control group and experimental group and non-experimental research, you want to understand how that variable impacts the other, or what the relationship is. So because you're not manipulating, there are a few limitations, but the main way that researchers address that is to control for spurious relationships. So we've talked a lot about extraneous variables, potentially confounding variables. Now, if there is an instance where the relationship between variables is actually due to a confounding variable, we call that a spurious relationship. So the relationship that you observed is not actually due to the relationship between the variable, but a third variable. So I'm trying to think of the class.
Dr. Martin, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So I know non-experimental research is used in quantitative research. That's what the book talks about. Is it ever used in qualitative, or is it can be used in qualitative, but it's mostly used in quantitative?
No, it would just be quantitative. Now,
okay.
Now, in the sense that I'm talking about it, so it is true that qualitative research is not experimental research. So if you were thinking about it like that, but in this sense, it's non-experimental research is a method of quantitative research. So, I mean, you might hear someone say that, but it's more of, if they're talking about it that way, they're talking about it more generally and not a specific method. Whereas non-experimental research is a quantitative method that involves variables, whereas qualitative research, you don't have variables. But, you know, sometimes, like if I'm teaching undergrads, you know, I might say experimental, I might say qualitative research is not experimental, teach it like that. But this, especially if you see like non-experimental in one word, that's going to be the quantitative. So if you have this, I was trying to think of the classic example of, it was something about like ice cream sales is correlated to something, but really temperature was the cause. So if you're looking at the relationship between variables, something like that. So that's why oftentimes in education, we often see researchers controlling for things like amount of money that's spent per pupil in a school. So things like that can have an impact. So if there's a relationship that's not because of the variables of interest, we call that a spurious relationship. It can also be a partially spurious relationship if it's partly because of that. And so let's see. Okay, so now these are some of the techniques, and we talked about this on the midterm about how to control for those. You can use statistical methods to control and make sure that you are controlling for those potentially confounding variables. Now, to go off of what Ebony was talking about with quantitative research, so the method of analysis for quantitative research is going to be involving statistics. So we have chapter 18 over descriptive statistics and chapter 19 over inferential statistics. So most quantitative research involves both. Descriptive research is describing the characteristics of the data that was collected from the participants in the study, but inferential statistics allows you to make inferences beyond the immediate sample. So that's when hypothesis testing comes in. So with descriptive statistics, there's two kind of main buckets that we talked about: central tendency, like mean, median, mode, what is about average, or a middle number that's representative of most of the participants. Of course, lots of limitations there, but central tendency, mode, median, means. And here, of course, you can get the definitions here or in the text, any of those. And then the other one that we studied was measures of variability. So that is how far spread apart the scores are. So range, variance, standard deviation. So on the final, of course, you're not going to have to calculate anything. It won't be a question like, oh, here's, you know, a data set. What is the mean, median, and mode? No, it'll be more so conceptual, like, what is an example of a measure of central tendency and what's the definition? More so a question like that. Or like for relative standing, like a percentile rank, like asking you to, I think, and we'll have a practice question about that. It's like, you know, if someone is in the 60th percentile, what does that mean? So questions like that, as opposed to calculating, making sure that you understand the concepts that are involved with that. And then the last example that I want you to know from chapter 18 is about regressions. So we talked about simple regression and multiple regression. And if you understand one, you will be able to apply it and understand both. So regression, you can think of it like correlation. How is one variable related to the next? But it's taking correlation and then making predictions based on the correlation that was gathered in the study. So in order for you to carry out regression analysis, you need to have quantitative variables, numerical variables, hours studying versus final exam score. So if I wanted to do a simple regressions, I would take everyone's score, how many hours they studied, if somehow I could get that. And then what I could, well, yeah, no. Okay, I'm getting so distracted. I'm sorry. So hours of studying versus final exam score, and I could plot the correlation, but then based on that, I could make predictions for the next semester and tell my students, okay, based on this simple regression, if you study for the exam 4 hours, you should get a 9.3 on the final. So multiple regressions is when you have more than one independent variable. So it's when you're making predictions about how multiple independent variables will impact the dependent variable. So for this one, you can think about that correlation line, plotting hours studied versus final exam scores. Okay, so inferential statistics. So this is a longer chapter. I want you to focus in on the second half that is about inferential statistics. So this is important because you saw this in your article critique, those of you who did quantitative or mixed methods proposals. This is the method for analyzing quantitative data. So quantitative data is confirmatory, confirming is the relationship between variables due to chance or due to an actual relationship. And so statistics, inferential statistics can help, is a method to test those variables and the relationship between it. So there's a few main ones that we talked about that I'm going to review here, and then there's the slides, and I did highlight for you in the notes just some hints and examples to help you understand what it means. So the first one is a t-test. So a t-test is when you want to know if there's a statistically significant difference between the means of two groups. And so this is when you have a quantitative dependent variable like income. For the example of how does gender impact the starting income of college graduates. So the income is quantitative, and then a dichotomous, which means two levels, independent variable that is categorical, or it could be categorical like gender. So this one, you just have two groups, and you have your sample, you collect the incomes, you sort it by gender, and then, well, I guess this example is kind of dated in the text, but if you just had two groups that you were looking at, you could do a t-test. You would take the mean of each group and then run the analysis. And of course, statisticians would use a computer program to help them do this now, to determine, is there a statistically different difference between the means of two groups? And if there's so, you can make the finding that there's a difference in income based solely on gender. So that is t-test. So here's the example that they gave here. They just have two here, but again, so now another one is a one-way analysis of variance, and you can also use an ANOVA if you want to compare the means of two different groups. So ANOVA you can use if you, again, have a dependent variable and categorical independent variables. You can use it if you have two or more. So in this example, so in this example, they're looking at starting salaries and then major. But this one, they have more than just two different majors. They have education, arts and sciences, and engineering. So since it's more than two groups, they can't do t-test. They're doing an ANOVA. But if it is two groups, you could do either t-test or ANOVA. So when you're doing those questions, you can look into the other one. And then there is also let me find it. There's also the chi-squared that you can look at too in the text. There's a question on the there's a question like that we can practice. So inferential statistics. So the next we went into the different qualitative, the different types of qualitative design that we're covering. So here we have this table. I know a lot of people found this table really helpful in the perusals, but we have phenomenology, ethnography, case study, grounded theory, narrative inquiry. So for these types of questions, you might have some situational questions and you'll have to say what type of design it is, or you might have to describe how you might carry out an ethnography, for instance. So you should be able to describe how you would do an ethnography of a rural high school. So you would, look into the data sources to make sure that you could describe how you would carry that out. And then, so there's subtypes. So there's subtypes of case studies in the text. They talk about different types of case studies. So that could be helpful for you to know different types of case studies. And then also there are different types of narrative studies. I can't recall if there's a question about that, but just I recommend if you get a question like that, going to the chapter, like for instance, case study. So case study, there's several different types of case studies. So they have that in the text, like the intrinsic case study, an instrumental case study, and then collective case study, just 3 different types. And same thing for narrative inquiry. There's 3 different types there too. Those can help you remember how, like, my tip for the midterm is, like, if you're not sure, like, just give more details and definitions to kind of get you a little bit half of a point. So that's kind of a recommendation if it's like a case study question. And even if you get maybe the type wrong, but you're able to explain what it is and give a definition, you'll be able to get quite a few points to do that. So this table is here to help you. Okay, I guess I put it here too, I forgot. So narrative inquiry, of course. So for this, the researcher is doing interviews. They might go to the person's home to try to understand and experience through the story, either a lived story, retold story, or some of those other types. And then case study, like I mentioned, the different types here. Intrinsic case study, you want to understand a particular case to understand that particular place or situation. So this is most closely related to like action research or evaluation research, where they're trying to understand what's happening to try to make it better in that particular instance. Classic case study design is just in general. Then instrumental case study, it's when you do a case study, but you want to generalize it beyond just that specific case. So if you want to understand something that's happening in like after school programs, you might study one that's representative of several similar ones, versus intrinsic would be just to understand that particular place that you're studying. And then collective case study is when you do more than one location to either do similarities and differences, or to establish a theory, or to have a better understanding through looking at more than one. So this could be, again, with the like after school programs example, you could look at some different types to try to understand what's happening. Then phenomenology, ethnography, grounded theory. So phenomenology, trying to understand what the experience of something is like, the essence of a thing that people go through. So through this, interviews and analyzing in a way to try to identify the enduring essence of an experience. So you would do interviews and ask them open-ended questions about that experience to try to understand this essence. And then ethnography is focused on understanding the cultural characteristics of a group or a place. And so this is carried out through participant observation over an extended length of time, where the researcher goes in, day out, and immerses themselves in the group or the organization, and takes field notes, collects documents, informal interviews and conversations, is memoing and writing, analyzing those field notes that they take. And then grounded theory is when the researcher does interviews, and they are not starting off with the theory. They will hope to come out of a theory through their interviews. Like maybe like if you wanted a theory of like maybe kind of like the socialization into graduate school as a full-time teacher. You know, you might do interviews like at several points throughout, and then kind of through that recursive analysis, come up with a model for how people's attitudes tend to be over the course, maybe at the beginning. And you know, I haven't carried this out, but in the beginning, everyone's super excited, their attitudes. Then in the middle, maybe they're overwhelmed, you know, struggle with, and then at the end, they have this sense of satisfaction. So that's an example of what might come out of grounded theory. It's like you're collecting, you're like, I want to understand what is that cycle like, collect the data, and then through analyzing it, you come up with this theory that describes what something is like in that way. And then mixed research. So this is when you have a research question that you think can best be answered by drawing from both qualitative and quantitative methods, and where the paradigms are complementary, and by paradigm just meaning design, qualitative versus quantitative, and they can complement each other and are not overlapping, taking out. So thinking about concurrent versus sequential. So concurrent doesn't have to be literally the quantitative and qualitative are collected at the same time, the same general time with the same group of people. So sequential would be maybe even totally different participants are participating in the quantitative versus qualitative, or a significant amount of time has passed between them. So concurrent is when the data are collected around the same time and then analyzed together around the same time. Sequential might be you do the quantitative part, you analyze it, and then based on that, you choose your participants to do that. So concurrent is around the same time with the same people. Sequential, more time is between, and it could be totally different participants. And then the paradigm, and again, paradigm, they mean quantitative versus qualitative. It might be equal status or dominant status. So this is the table. And I know Elaine was asking about how, you know, specific you have to be. So you don't have to necessarily use this terminology. And sometimes researchers don't, but they do explain in explaining their data collection procedures. You should be able to tell if there is a primary paradigm or which one came first. Is it the same participants? Is it different? So there are a few situational questions like that that you'll do. Well, okay, maybe one, but there's probably one to practice too. So pay attention to which one is happening first. And it's not the symbols on the test, it's written out like primary, concurrent, or equal status and sequential. Okay, towards 2 more chapters. So then chapter 20 is about data analysis for both qualitative and mixed methods. So for quantitative design, you have statistical methods of analysis. For qualitative designs, you have coding. That's the only method we're learning about in this class. There are more, but coding is pretty common in qualitative research, and you saw that in your article critique. So coding is when the researcher takes the interview transcripts, the focus group transcripts, their field notes, their memos, and they read through them and assign a code, a word or two that represents the meaning of that segment of text. So this has different stages. So first stage is the initial, and here are the different types that are used for initial coding. And then secondary coding, you take all of those initial codes, you can consolidate them, collapse them, and then organize them together in a way that produces the themes or the findings. And some studies have third stage. Grounded theory has 3 stages. And then, researchers are constantly going back and adding on. But in general, first stage coding and second stage. So here you can see segmenting the data, like breaking down the transcripts into shorter chunks, coding, and then developing the category system, which is the third stage. So for the codes, we have inductive codes that come from the researcher. This is like summarizing, and there's some different methods for this too. And then in vivo, taking the participants' words, just a keyword out of their quote and using that. And then a priori is when the researcher would make a list of terms that they're looking for before they even look at the data, and then go and assign one of those to each. And then I know that the text talks about the theming the data and ways to do the secondary coding to come up with the relationships. They give this example of some of the different methods that they might use to identify the relationships. So I think, you need to know the difference between these codes for sure, and then maybe just understand that these are some examples of how you could identify relationships when you are doing second stage. And then mixed research. So mixed research, I put this table in here. I took a screenshot and that's right here. So sorry, but this is in your text. So use this because this has all of the different methods that you can use for analysis in mixed research. Data reduction, this says data display, data transformation, data correlation, data consolidation. So this will be really helpful, particularly just so you don't get confused. I know that there's consolidation and correlation. So data reduction is when you would reduce the number of the number of components that you have included, like find a way to reduce the number of variables in the parts that you have, or the different, like the amount of data that you're analyzing, reducing that so you can have a closer look. Data display is using some type of visual representation to represent both the qualitative and the quantitative. Data transformation, we talked about this in this chapter, quantitizing qualitative data and qualitizing quantitative data. So you can search for these terms too if you want to see examples of those. One example of data transformation is if you have qualitative data with your codes, if you collect a frequency count of how many times that code came up, like exhausted. If you're interviewing, what's it like finals week, phenomenology. So after interviewing some grad students during finals week, analyzing it, one of the codes that came up was exhausted. You might tally up how many times that code came up. That's an example of data transformation. That's enumeration, doing a frequency count. Data correlation is an example of that, is an example of transforming qualitative data into quantitative, or vice versa to find the relationship. You can even do data correlation with the quantitative data, how that correlates to the qualitative data. And then data consolidation, you're creating new variables, combining it together to make a new data set that's then analyzed. So this, I think, will be very helpful just so you can keep those terms handy in the definitions, and then you can look into the text for further detail about each of those. Okay, so for writing the report, these questions are kind of coming back to, do you understand how a qualitative paper will look different from a quantitative paper? So for instance, in a quantitative paper, in the results section, you're going to see statistical analysis. You're going to see hypothesis testing, t-test, ANOVA, chi-squared, descriptive statistics, because it's quantitative research. Versus in qualitative research, you are going to see the themes and quotes from the interview transcripts to explain, to help the researcher talk about that theme. And so hopefully you saw this through your article critiques, how it looks different in each of them. And then the last thing that you're going to do from chapter 21 is write a citation in APA form. So on the final, I give you a link to an article, and you have to make an APA citation to go with the article. Is that not good? You guys did a great job on your proposals. You know how to do it.
I think it's just a little nerve-wracking because it's a test, versus an assignment.
Well, I mean,
Plus, many people use citation machine.
Yeah, we'll use it to check.
Okay.
So use it to check, but some of the citation machines, or even like Google Scholar, I use that, but I can tell a lot of times they're incomplete. Like sometimes they don't have the volume, but that's, to me, that's this is kind of like the debate, like with, we're getting ready for milestones, and one of my students, he like writes in Grammarly, which I'm like, that's so smart at 8 years old that you're doing that. Like, I was like, I am not mad at all. Like, but you need to know how to analyze it. So I would, if it was me, I would use a generator. I would look, but then I would check, based on the text and what I know it needs to have, make sure it's correct. Because sometimes they will leave something up, or even do it in 2 different places, because sometimes there's 2 different generators. And then the Georgia State Library too will form a citation for you. You guys know how to do that? I think that I showed that in the video, about looking up sources.
Yeah, I was about to say, I do remember you showing us how to look up sources.
Is it right next to, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
Oh, no.
Okay. Is it right where it says site, like on the side, there's a little thing that says site? Is that what you're talking about once you find the article?
Yeah. So
Okay.
if I want to, if Google Scholar, I can tell that there's a lot of information missing. I'll go to the library. I'm in the database. So, when you go to the library homepage, you go to database by subject, like here's education. So I just went to EBSCO. I was just at a conference and I heard a paper about this. Okay, so let's say that this is the article. So when you, oh no, I want this one. I just saw this article. That's so funny. Okay, so yeah, so you click on it, and then right here you can see site. Yep, just like you were saying. And then you can go down APA, and of course, this is what I'm saying, just double check. The last name, I don't know. Okay, so that's the APA. I know our text didn't talk about what to do in this case, but your example is not this advanced. So, last name, first name, date, title, journal and I don't think you can do italics on the test. So that's okay. And then the journal number, the issue, and then the page number. So just double checking, okay, this one has everything you need, copy paste. So that is an overview of the content for the chapter. Of course, you can use these notes. You can use your text. You can use your classmates' responses to perusal, you know, of course. Again, you have to look at it and make sure that they're correct before you use their answer, but that is available. So let's go over the multiple choice, and then if we have more time, I'll go through any of these questions that I kind of want to go into as well. Okay, so the first one. So going back to non-experimental research, when a relationship is due to a third variable that you're not including in the study, partially due to it, what would that be? You can private chat, public chat.
Oh, you said privately, sorry.
Or however you want to do it.
A.
Well, it would be except partially.
Oh, partially, then it would be C,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, it would be C, but on the final, it's not partially. I just was trying to make it different. So I didn't have the same exact one. So there's not like a tricky question like that, but yes. So it's a spurious relationship because it's a confounding or potentially confounding. So exactly. Okay, so non-experimental research cannot involve which one?
A.
A, exactly. So instead of manipulating, it's trying to understand the relationship between the variables. Okay, multiple regressions.
Isn't it how two or more independent variables?
Yep.
A.
Yep, this explain or predict the score. Very good. So, like I was saying, there's not going to be one where it's like, is this simple or multiple regressions? But, you know, the concept simple regressions is one independent variable, one dependent, and then multiple, you have more than one independent. So, but just the key point is understanding that they can predict. And those are quantitative variables. Okay, so difference between two means. This would be a t-test, and then the other option, since it's two, could be, you're used to seeing it as an acronym, but this is spelled out.
I want to say A.
You're used to seeing it as ANOVA.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, but ANOVA stands for one-way analysis of variance. I'm thinking about why is that the acronym? Okay, ANOVA, ANOVA, variance. Okay, that's where the ANOVA, okay, analysis of variance. So yes, so that and t-test can both help you find the difference between the means of two different groups, or ANOVA could be more than one group too. Okay, so this one, two categorical variables, constructs a contingency table. So finding if there is a statistical relationship between the variables on this contingency table.
Contingency table.
That's the chi-squared. I feel like we talked about that at least when it came to hypothesis testing. So that's So where they have, so they have this example here. So, and this is related to that same the same data involving oh, this is okay, so this is college major by sex, and so they have this table, and then they find out, is there a statistical relationship based on the model that they created for the table. Okay, then we have, what do we have? Okay, so a quantitative study. Oh, that's a typo. I should say qualitative. Fix that. So this is a qualitative study. And she is talking to participants in their homes, schools, workplaces. And so what would that be?
Narrative.
Narrative inquiry.
Very good. Narrative. Okay, so this one, increasing or interested in studying voters where they want to increase school funding. So they want to find out why the initiatives are being turned down in this particular city in context. So they're not trying to generalize it. Intrinsic. So if they wanted to generalize it and understand, okay, we want to understand voting patterns across the nation, we're going to do a case study in this one city and think that that's going to tell us, that would be instrumental. Collective would be like, let's pick 5 different cities, do a case study, and then generalize. But intrinsic is because of this word particular, city and context. And then generalizable study, that's not a term, but that would be mostly associated with A. Okay, grounded theory, what is the method of data collection? That table is gonna come in handy.
Is it interviews?
Yep. So, you know, standardized test is going to be quantitative, grading skills, quantitative. So interviews. Okay, so this one is a mixed method study. So wasn't I telling you how I was looking this out that one weekend about the snake handling in Turkey? Okay, if you were on that Zoom, you heard me talk about that. Okay, that's a tangent. So in this example, it's mixed methods. So the situation, qualitative researcher and conducts interviews. And then while they're there, hands out a short quantitative instrument that provides frequencies. So already from the phrasing, you can tell that it's primarily primarily qualitative. Yes. So it's primary status. And so now we just need to decide sequential or concurrent. What do y'all think? While she's already there doing interviews, she also gives this out too.
Sequential.
Yes, concurrent. So since it's around the same time with the same people, it's primary status concurrent. Sequential would be if it was a whole separate part, another time and place, maybe even different participants. Okay, so codes that are generated by the researcher, a priori, post hoc, master list, or inductive.
Would it be inductive?
Yes.
Inductive letter A. I mean, D.
Yes. So a priori is when you take words from the transcript, and then none of the others are examples. The only other one was a priori. Oh, we do have a priori. No, I said it wrong. Okay. A priori is when you have your code list first. In vivo is when it comes from the participant words. So that's not on here, but in vivo is when you take their words exactly. Okay, okay, so they're coding into different categories, and then they count the number of codes. So that would be quantitizing the data transformation, correlating the qualitative data to a quantitative measure. You remember what that's called when you do a frequency count?
Letter. It should be D, numeration.
Yeah, you can see the word number in there, kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. So enumeration is like a frequency count. You count the number of times a particular code comes up. Okay, so mixed analysis. So that was that table that I was telling you about that had the data reduction, data transformation, data correlation, data consolidation. So in this one, you're correlating or cross-classifying different types, such as transforming the qualitative data into categorical variables.
Data transformation.
Data
So
correlation.
it is transforming the data, but since you're cross-classifying, data transformation can be a type of data correlation. So when you are transforming the data, yes, this part is data transformation, but for the purpose of data correlation. But again, if this was one of those short answers, if you explain, it would be great. Okay, so what would not be used in a quantitative report?
A.
Quotes from the research participants would be in a qualitative report. Okay, so those are the practice questions. Let me see if there's any up here that I want to make sure that you know. Third party, this is a spurious relationship. We talked about that. So ANOVA would be used to control for extraneous variables in non-experimental research when there's a potentially, when you have to use statistical measures to control multiple regressions. So for this one, we know we have quantitative independent variable and quantitative dependent variable. Oh, okay, percentile rank. What does this mean if someone scores in the 70th percentile?
Is it like they I don't, it's like, because I see this all the time when like we get the results back from map testing and stuff like that. So I know
How does
70
it compare?
percentile is better than the 50th percentile.
So it
Wouldn't
means
it be there in the top 70%?
they scored better than 70% of other kids who took the same test. So if you're the 90th percent, their score is higher than 90% of kids their same age.
Gotcha.
So it's how you compare to the other people that took that same test. So yeah, their score was better than 70% of all the other participants.
So can I ask a quick question about that?
Mhm.
I know you were talking about the milestone. So it's like with the EOC, then I don't know if this will make sense or not, but would that mean it's like distinguished?
So that one, I don't remember if they give you a percentile rank. So the milestone, they use like they have like their own scores that they put into categories. But sometimes they
Yeah,
might.
I'm sorry, they compare it with the district. They compare it with school by school, and they compare that data with a student by student too.
Yeah.
I
They
was
do
just, That really helps because we're getting ready to take the EOCs. And when I was reading that and I was seeing that in my mind, like, well, how is it really compared? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because they have the bell curve and they're, so I know that's a little bit off topic, but when you mentioned that, I've always wondered who are you comparing it to know, if it's over and the percentile. I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. And Milestones doesn't have it in the same way with the percentile ranking. But they they kind of use more so the Z-score where they have like a raw score and then they correlate that to, it's not exactly like a bell curve. I haven't looked exactly at that. I'm just like, get all the answers right. But because, yeah. So
Okay, thank you.
they do have, like the statistics behind how they do that, but it's not that transparent. Like you don't know. It's like they take all the kids' scores and they kind of decide every year what the range is going to be, but they do use like the curve a little bit, but it's not as like set as a percentile. Okay, so independent between two groups, we did this one using t-test or ANOVA, one-way analysis of variance. So the variables that are appropriate for a t-test in ANOVA, do you guys remember what kind of variables you can use with t-test and ANOVA? So if you know that regressions, it's all quantitative. ANOVA and t-test is if you have one categorical and one quantitative variable. And that's, I highlighted those for you on the slides too. Okay, we did that one, narrative inquiry. We did this one, an intrinsic case study, grounded theory interviews. So the overall purpose, you can look on the that table like phenomenology to understand the essence or the enduring fundamental characteristics of experience, culture to make a theory. This was the snake handling one. We did that. So the two elements that if you're doing mixed methods, you need to think about, is it equal status or is it mostly qualitative or quantitative? And then the different types, is it going to be concurrent, collected around the same time, or sequential? The three different types of codes, a priori, inductive, in vivo. And then this is what I meant by some approaches to theming or identifying the relationships. So there you can look at the Spratting's different relationships and talk about some different approaches to theming the data, different ways to look at relationships and the connections. This was that data correlation one, data consolidation, where you were actually combining the data to make a new data set that you then analyze. Okay. And then these we know, we talked about those. Quantitative report versus qualitative, statistics versus codes. Okay, it's going to be the same format, 10 multiple choice, 10 short answer. Like I said, people say it's normally a little bit easier than the midterm, but I did make the midterm a little easier than it was in previous semesters. Not easier, just less writing. Instead of being like, describe all of the relationships that could be, or instead of saying, describe all three types of coding, I might say do one. So anything you want me to go over?
I have a quick question. And it's not about the midterm, it's more about the video presentation that's due. Not the midterm, I'm sorry, I'm so tired. I apologize. It's not about the final. Should I wait to ask this question? Because it's not about the final?
No, go ahead.
Okay. It's about the video presentation. So I'm struggling because I'm pretty long-winded and I have like a whole bunch of slides in there. So how exactly pinpointed do you want? Like what are some targets you want in that video?
It's okay if you go longer. I just wanted to take the pressure off so you knew it doesn't have to be a lot. So like the big things like my research question, if you want to talk a little bit about why you're doing it, and then the design, say it's quantitative or qualitative, here's what the data collection will be, and then the analysis. So, you know, hit on those points, you know, and you can talk about, you know, the participants. I mean, I know for you, it's going to be longer just because you're passionate about it, but that's okay. You won't be punished. So I just want to take the pressure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to actually make it shorter because I'm really working on this and I am very passionate about it. So like, for example, when you ask, why are you doing this? Like, is it okay to say the personal reason why you would do it? Or do you, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Okay.
that's kind of that's like a method for, I know we talked about this with qualitative research, for trustworthiness, to be like transparent about what brought you to the study. You know, that kind of establishes how, you know, trustworthiness about it. You know, maybe you're a part of it, maybe you're not at all. And then you're like, okay, so I don't know that I really know that this is so I think that that's really good.
Okay, thank you. That helps a lot. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Dr. Martin, I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I just want to say